Hello everyone, and welcome back to Retrospectives-Be-Damned. Let's cut right to the chase. Today's episode will cover the 30th anniversary of the Final Fantasy franchise. It's been 30 years. In honor of this fantastical Final Fantasy anniversary, I'll be giving you guys some personal stories that I have from just the 15 main entries in the series. Otherwise, if I covered everything Final Fantasy related, I'd need to make a full hour-long episode. And I think this should be nice, short, and sweet. So without further delay, let's begin our journey. The first three Final Fantasy games, well, I'm not a huge fan of them. I got Final Fantasy 1 and 2 as part of the Game Boy Advance collection, and later on got Final Fantasy 2 for the Famicom. Final Fantasy 3 I played for the first time on DS with the remake that was released. I do appreciate what they did for the series, but I did play them after the PlayStation Final Fantasy games, so my expectations were naturally off on how the games played and looked. Eventually, I got around to playing the 16-bit era Final Fantasy titles, also after the PlayStation Final Fantasy games. I really enjoyed Final Fantasy IV's story of Cecil going from Dark Knight to Light Paladin. It was really badass and was presented well. I couldn't get into Final Fantasy V and 6. 5 just didn't capture my attention at all. 6, to be fair, was never given a lot of my time, and I really didn't give it a chance. At the time of this writing, I just got a SNES Classic, which includes 6, so maybe with time, I'll have a different opinion on it. Final Fantasy VII was my introduction to the Final Fantasy series. I went over to my friend's house, and his brother had a PlayStation. I had seen the PlayStation before, but never a game like this. The cinematic quality, the seamless transition from gameplay to CGI, the way the battle system played out, it was all so fascinating to me. I had never seen anything like that until that day. Ironically, I wouldn't get my own copy of Final Fantasy VII until much later in my adult life. The first Final Fantasy game I ever owned was Final Fantasy VIII, and it's still my favorite in the series. I just really connected to that game during the time that I played it. I enjoyed the love story aspect, appreciated all of the characters, and being a young teen at the time, connected with the school setting. Final Fantasy IX was my next Final Fantasy game, and it was the end of an era. I really enjoyed how different it felt over Final Fantasy VII and VIII, while also being a great send-off to the 32-bit era of Final Fantasy. It was also the last single-player Final Fantasy game with no voice acting, something that I miss from time to time. This was the beginning of a new era of Final Fantasy. Better graphics, a new battle system, and for the first time ever in a Final Fantasy title, voice acting. The voice acting in Final Fantasy X took some time to get used to, but a lot of video games at the time were fully voiced, and Square didn't want their flagship series lagging behind other games. I loved the battle system in Final Fantasy X. To this day, it's still my favorite one. I love being able to see whose turn was next, and knowing that I could take my time planning out my moves. It made for a more strategic game. At this point, I was getting the Final Fantasy games as they were being released. But that would soon end. Around the time Final Fantasy XI came out, I had taken a break from gaming and missed out on XI's initial release. I eventually bought it later down the road, and I honestly had no idea what I was doing. I was the noobiest of noobs. It was my first MMO, and I didn't even know how to find quests and was just grinding against enemies the whole time. I actually accidentally forgot to turn off my subscription. So for a whole year, my parents were being charged for something I wasn't using, which at the time was so embarrassing. But my mom took it well, by not finding out. I picked up Final Fantasy XII while I was working at a GameStop, or I guess it was called Planet X, but was owned by GameStop. My first job. Anyway, it was the first Final Fantasy that got me back into Final Fantasy, and led me to tracking down the older games I had missed out on during my break. Recently, I played the remaster, and it's just not for me. I definitely see the appeal of Final Fantasy XII, but I just couldn't get into it. By the time Final Fantasy XIII came out, I was fully back into video games. I remember feeling pleased and not understanding all the criticism the game received at the time of release. But looking back on it, I totally get what people were saying. It is not a bad Final Fantasy game by any means, but it's not an amazing one either. I skipped out on the first round of Final Fantasy XIV, but really enjoyed A Realm Reborn when it came out. The world felt so expansive. I played for about a month, but I find that I just don't have time to play MMOs. I love them, but I just don't have time to commit to them. So I let my game fade away after my month trial was over. During that month though, I played that game like crazy and had some really fun memories from it. On a side note, my sister, her boyfriend, and some of their friends still play to this day, and I couldn't be prouder. Final Fantasy XV was great. It was another shift in the Final Fantasy series, and I love the way Square is handling the free and paid-for content. At the time of this writing, I'm still waiting for the Comrades multiplayer expansion, which looks like a lot of fun, and have enjoyed pretty much everything the game has offered so far. The only gripe I have is that I felt like the main character was a bit forgettable for some reason. I only remember his friends, but not much of Noctis, who was the main character. On that note, that wraps up my personal thoughts on the Final Fantasy series. It's been 30 years since that first fantasy, and each one has taken us to new worlds and has let us meet exciting characters and experience epic stories. Thinking of all the different worlds and places Final Fantasy has taken us during these last 30 years, I can only imagine how many other adventures will go on in the next 30. Until next time, guys, Retrospectives-Be-Damned, I'm telling my story.
Finally, these retrospectives are completed. Next year will be mine.
What? Another goddamn cliffhanger? A random man is plotting? Do I ever get my paychecks? Find out these answers and more next year on Retrospectives-Be-Damned! Seriously though, that last check never went through. I just want the next payment in cash, damn it.